post-war trauma, the impact of prolonged exposure to war, displacement, and instability on refugee children, youth, and family. This is a scholarly article that examines life experience of war-related trauma, refugee mental health, and overall collective healing. This book encompasses life experience from family, youth, and children who have experienced long exposure to war, displacement, instability, identity rupture, and just overall complex layers of trauma. For those of you who may not know my story, this is a very unique way to dive into my story, not just as a person, but also the background. A lot of times I meet people and they say, why are you such a strong advocate? Well, the only way to know that is to dive into this book. It holds all the secrets of resilience, healing, and strength. How did I come to write post-war trauma? Coming from the background of Liberia. By the way, for my Liberian audience, my culture or my tribe is a mix of the Gribble tribe. To my Gribble people, we say Nawia. Nawia is hello in Gribble. And to my Bassa side of Liberia is Mwene, which is hello in Bassa. Bassa is a long standing tribe and language of people that goes back to ancient Egypt. But that's a story for another day. Again, we're here to talk about trauma and the impact on our overall immigrants population of children, youth, and family. Well, my background is in counseling psychology, but I started off as a social worker and child and youth counselor. I moved a little bit into community advocacy and leadership, and I'm super honored to be the board chair of Canadian Intercultural Integration Council. And today, in this environment and in this sacred space, we are here at the Afrika Diaspora History Library. This library is run and operated by the Prince of Wales Building located in Edmonton, but the executive director is Niti Werkani, who I call him my global mentor. Ni is like the United Nations. He's surrounded by people from all tribes, from all backgrounds, from all culture. He is global. I encourage you to come into this space where you will get to explore Africa narrative told from the lens, perspective, and lived experience of Black people. Remember, our history was written for us. But in this era, we get to rewrite that history from our lens, our experience. What is the best way to pin your story is to write it down. And this is why I'm here. You see, trauma must be understood. Trauma is not one dimensional. We have acute trauma, which is a single event that happened to us. Say you're driving, you hit a tree, boom, and that situation is likely not going to happen for a very long time or never again. But then you have chronic trauma, repeated multiple incidents happening over a certain amount of time, and then we'll dive into complex trauma. But today, as we talk about post-war trauma, we're looking at chronic trauma. Post-war trauma is connected to an exposure to prolonged level of trauma over time. You're talking about instability, displacement. You're talking about identity rupture. How does identity rupture happen? Let's break that down. Identity rupture, when you are moved from another geographical location, not because you wanted to move, but because you had no other option, and migration was the only option. And you are placed into a culture that is foreign to you, language different from yours, food different from yours, and just overall merging or integrating into that culture. So war doesn't end when we move immigrants and bring them into a system that we feel is okay for them to settle and integrate. The war lives within. Even when the war is done, the trauma still continues inside of us. And this is why post-war trauma was written. As a young adult back then in Edmonton, as a teenager, going to schools in Edmonton, I felt like I was not understood that teachers, educators did not understand me. And sometimes when we encounter children and youth who has been exposed to trauma, sequential amount of trauma, we tend to see behavior that we deem and code as abnormal. But what that is trauma expression. Trauma is expressed in different forms. Some youth may go through withdrawals. Some youth may go through violent outbursts. Some youth may go through behavior abnormalities, as we call them and see them. So it is important. I encourage you, if you are a university professor, if you are a teacher, if you are an advocate, or you simply run an organization that supports immigrants who have experienced not just war, but who had to move from their home into their society, it is important that you understand immigration and integration on a much deeper level. And this is why this book exists, Post-War Trauma. In this book, we talk about the biopsychosocial theory. Now, the biosocial psychosocial theory encapsulates not just our biology, but how our environment impacts us as a whole. And then we have the ecological system theory. That ecological system theory talks about how our communities and what are our communities. Whenever we talk about communities, we tend to think about a group of people living in a single space. But in this context of community, we're looking at the schools, the justice systems, the shopping centers, the churches, and just our overall environment, how that comes together and impacts the person. Now, when we talk about individual who has been exposed to sequential chronic trauma, we're looking at things like the ACEs study. The ACEs, what is the ACEs? Adverse childhood experiences. Now, when we conduct ACEs test, we find that most children, youth, and family who has been exposed to severe amount of trauma scores very high on ACEs, and that impacts the learning ability, that impacts the way they interact with peers, that impacts the way they build relationships. I'm just going to take you a little deeper. Let's look at the brain and the structure of the brain. I like to picture the brain like a pear shape. At the bottom of this pear, that's the amygdala. The amygdala can be looked at as the emotional brain. This is where we either feel sad, feel happy, feel excited. It's responsible for our emotional regulation. Now, for individual children, youth, and families who have been exposed to sequential amount of trauma over time, for example, intergenerational trauma. What is that? Intergenerational trauma is trauma transmitted across generation. It mimics within the DNA and starts to become expressed through one generation to the other. So you have kids who are unable to regulate themselves as normal kids would. That amygdala, emotional brain, is on what we call hyper alert. So they're always hyper vigilant. They're sensitive to the environment. You may hear things like, oh, he bullied me and she bullied me, and they pick on me and they laugh at me. It may not be the case, but that's how their brain is processing it. Or they're always looking out for danger. A person who has been exposed to trauma, even in relationship, they tend to self-sabotage that relationship. They're looking at what will go wrong as opposed to what is going right. Even if they're in school, they're thinking about, am I going to fail, as opposed to what am I doing well now? So instead of living in the here and now, they're constantly in that state of hyperarousal. Then we'll come to the hippocampus. Now, when we look at the hippocampus, that's the middle part of the brain. That is the part of the brain that is responsible for communicating information back and forth from the lower brain to the upper brain. Imagine having been exposed to sequential trauma over time. There's a lot of miscommunication that is happening there. Reading into things wrongly, constantly afraid, worries about the future, the here and now. What a way to live. And this, again, there is hope. This is why this book is written, because the information transmitted can also affect the prefrontal cortex, which is the front part of the brain that is responsible for logical thinking. If you are a teacher, professor, or an advocate, or you run a community organization, you might have observed an immigrant family and wonder to yourself, why do they do what they do? Why did that youth violated that law, that rules, that regulations? Why are they in the justice system? Well, if you have the the prefrontal cortex receiving mixed messaging and it's not processing with logic, you will have a lot of flaws or you will have a lot of systemic issues. Now, to our justice system, we need police officers who are equipped in trauma-informed practice to help understand how to work with immigrants, um, young adults who are in the justice system. In order to truly understand how to work, you must remove, I said, the lamppost approach, where the light is shining. Around the lamppost, the light is there, but across from the lamppost is dark. In order to understand what is going on within the dark, you must leave where the light is and walk into the dark area. So again, we are working from the spot of the light. But in order to understand trauma in immigrant families, we must move into these dark spaces and work from a place of here and now and meet them where they're at. Again, trauma is not one dimensional. Trauma is multidimensional, and I invite you today to step into the lives of families and work from a place of intentionality and authenticity. And again, if you are able to, go to Amazon.ca, Amazon.com, and get a copy of this book, Post-War Trauma. And I tell you what, this is not only a memoir, it's a scholarship. When you read Post-War Trauma, I bet you it's going to open up a new lens on how to work with immigrants, children, youth, and family from a place that is holistic, that is cultural, and from a place of healing. For Liberia, we say under the Palaver Hut. Where is the Palaver Hut? The Palaver Hut talks about restorative justice, a justice that is rooted in our collective culture, healing that is rooted in community. Let's go back to the Genesis. I know when you hear Genesis, you think about the biblical narrative. But Genesis in this context invites you to come back to the root, to how we started, how we resolve issues, how we heal. We heal through our drummings, through our storytelling. We heal through our community, through empathy. And that takes collective effort. And this book invites community, systems, and people to come together in one space and discuss how healing can happen in a collective way. Trauma doesn't define a person. It's not the end of your story. It is the beginning of it. And resilience overpowers trauma. And I'm here to say to you, whatever it is you have gone through does not define you. You defined you. You are the author of your story. You can rewrite your narrative. You can redefine yourself. And I invite us all, from policymakers, and this is what we talk about policies in this book, from policymakers that are making rules and regulations and laws and legislation. I invite you to read Post-War Trauma, and this will help to inform some of the policies that are made and how these policies impact the overarching Black community, immigrant community, children, youth, and families. I want to thank you for your time today. Again, if you missed the beginning, my name is Bridgette Wilson-Kraii. I'm the author of Post-War Trauma, and I'm delighted to be in this space today, the Afrika Diaspora History Library, where our history are not just told, it is amplified. Thank you.